its very vast arsenal of ballistic missiles capable of firing U.S. ships far out at sea, the Navy has also begun to expand the number of Aegis-equipped vessels in its fleet. Starting in 2015, the Navy also began to work on undoing the strategy of carrier-based sea dominance that it's employed since the end of the Cold War. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. Navy enjoyed unmatched superiority and complete freedom of action anywhere in the world, and thus surface fleets were retasked with simply protecting carriers. Anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface warfare skills had atrophied as Navy strategy centered completely around the big carriers. Now the U.S. Navy is preparing its crews to once again face off against near-peer foes in ship-to-ship battles. Submarines are America's second greatest naval asset after aircraft carriers, yet remain nearly completely forgotten by most of the world, which is exactly how they like it. Currently, the U.S. has a fleet of 68 submarines, and it's replacing the Cold War Los Angeles-class fast attack submarines with the new Virginia class. Investment in submarines has stalled recently, and procurement plans are behind schedule, but the United States retains a significant advantage in undersea combat, despite China having a larger force of less advanced submarines. The realm of hypersonic missiles has received a great deal of attention ever since it was announced that the U.S. was lagging behind both Russia and China in their development. Yet there's some misinformation and confusion regarding this technology that's made Russia and China seem as if they hold a significant advantage over the U.S. in this realm, when they really don't. Firstly, any ballistic missile is hypersonic, and China's recent test that saw a hypersonic missile fly around the world is not very impressive from a military point of view. Technically speaking, it simply doesn't add any additional capability that didn't already exist. The real threat from hypersonic missiles comes from maneuverable hypersonics. These are missiles that can not only fly at hypersonic speeds, but can also maneuver while doing so, making them incredibly difficult to defend against. In this area, all three nations are still struggling to field fully operational missiles, but the U.S. has made great strides in recent tests. One area where the U.S. may in fact be coming up short is the development of advanced long-range air-to-air missiles. Recent photos of Chinese jets show that China has begun to field advanced beyond visual range missiles, while the U.S. is still largely equipped with the AIM-120, an extremely capable and combat-proven air-to-air missile that nevertheless is only effective at medium ranges. However, the Pentagon's F-3R program aims to improve capabilities of American air-to-air missiles by not just greatly expanding their range, but also improving efficiency in an electronically contested environment. A new generation of American missiles will feature two-way data links, GPS-enhanced inertial measurement units, an expanded no-escape envelope to increase lethality, and improved high-angle off-bore sight capability, allowing pilots to fire missiles without their plane being pointed directly at the enemy, thus lowering their vulnerability. However, the next step for U.S. fighters is the AIM-260, which will feature beyond visual range capabilities and match longer-range opposition missiles while bringing the tried-and-true technologies of the AIM-120. But World War III will also likely involve action against Russia in Europe, as China and Russia are both likely to cooperate in such a scenario. This will be a partnership of opportunity, however, not a choice, as relations between the nations are difficult at best, and Russia grows increasingly frustrated at its status as the junior partner. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Russian military has proven itself incompetent, corrupt, and inept at executing a modern 21st century war. Despite vastly superior firepower, the Russian offensive in Ukraine has all but stalled out. And this is with Russian forces facing a foe that has a fraction of the capabilities of the U.S. military. Simply put, the only real threat Russia can bring to a global war scenario is their nuclear power. With the bulk of the U.S. Army not taking part in operations in the Pacific, Russia would be easily contained by current U.S. ground firepower, while NATO would be short on critical air assets. These are capability gaps easily filled in by NATO air forces. 4 months ago, we would have spent an additional 10 minutes explaining to you how the U.S. is preparing to counter Russia. Today, after seeing what the Russian military is capable of, we honestly don't have to. While victory would come at a cost, NATO would most likely win a resounding victory over the Russian armed forces. The only real threat Russia would pose would be in the first few weeks as the bulk of American firepower is being shipped across the Atlantic and prepared for battle. This leaves the Baltics and Poland vulnerable, but the deployment of NATO rapid response forces would likely be enough to slow down an initial Russian offensive and greatly limit its gains until NATO's European partners can fully mobilize their own armies. U.S. strategy to counter Russian aggression in the next World War is thus based around preparing European partners to better defend their own continent and not be so reliant on the U.S. military, as the conflict against China will consume the bulk of U.S. sea and air power. The Pacific is where the real war will play out, and after its stunning losses in Ukraine, it's unlikely Russia would willingly engage NATO in the Third World War anyway. The unthinkable has happened, and military forces clash on land, in the air, and on the sea, and underneath it, in the most violent war to date. But what would actually happen after World War III? The probability of a third world war is negligible, but not impossible. All three of these big military powers who have the capability to launch a global war all have too much to lose by doing so. But history is full of examples of small conflicts spiraling completely out of control and beyond the plans of those who initiated them. To find out what the world would look like after World War III, we have to examine two different global wars, a conventional war and a nuclear war. One thing is for sure, the economic damage alone would reshape the face of the earth. Such a war would inevitably begin by a confrontation between U.S. and Chinese forces in the South or East China Sea. A Sino-U.S. war isn't likely to go global and would require multiple escalatory steps to get there. First, China would have to directly threaten or attack Japanese forces, something that is predisposed to do already because of the presence of multiple U.S. air bases in Japan. If China wanted to keep Japan out of the conflict, it would have to avoid striking these bases, which would have seriously detrimental effects on its ability to fight against the U.S. Next, a third party would have to be willing to exploit the situation to its own advantage. The most likely culprits here are India, Iran, and Russia. India would be tempted to act to push Chinese ground forces out of the contested northern border regions, and perhaps even maneuver itself to throw China out of Tibet, thus threatening Chinese fresh water supplies and granting it massive leverage over its rival. That's unlikely but not impossible, as a Sino-American war would largely be fought at the sea and in the air, leaving the People's Liberation Army free to fight against Indian incursion. Iran, however, is likely to exploit the diversion of U.S. forces from the region for its own gain. A war between the U.S. and China would inevitably cause a drawdown of U.S. peacekeeping forces in other regions of the world. Currently, 60% of U.S. firepower is in the Pacific, but as losses rapidly mount, the U.S. will need to pull reinforcements from its multiple other global commands. With American forces no longer acting as police against bad actors, Iran could use the opportunity to attack Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states with its superior military. This would hugely disrupt global oil trade and have devastating financial repercussions across the world. Russia might seek to exploit U.S. preoccupation with China for its own gain in Europe. While Russia has no ambition to rule all of Europe, it could see a drawdown of U.S. forces in Europe as the opportunity to take by force breakaway Soviet republics, and even some of its NATO neighbors, such as Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. In a worst-case scenario, all three flashpoints are ignited due to American preoccupation with China, leaving the world dramatically different after the war. Such a war is almost certain to end with a U.S. victory over China, although an extremely costly and poorly defined victory. Immediately after war's end, the United States military would be severely depleted, going from the world's most powerful fighting force to a significantly weakened force that still has global reach, but will take a decade or more to restore itself to its former glory. American naval and air losses would be staggering, as with much of half of its air and naval fleets destroyed, half of the U.S. aircraft carrier fleet would be sunk into conflict with China. A loss of over $50 billion in ship costs alone, over 500 aircraft, and over 12,000 seamen and aviators. The loss of all important American carriers alone would see the United States lose its ability to rapidly respond to global conflicts. This loss in capability would only be compounded by significant losses in the U.S. Air Force. Without the ability to rapidly and overwhelmingly respond to global crises, the immediate post-war years would see an ignition of regional wars across Africa and the Middle East. Critics of U.S. military presence around the world would rapidly see the cost of losing that peacekeeping force as simmering tensions suddenly explode in the absence of a threat of U.S. involvement. In the Middle East, Iran would seize the opportunity to attack its longtime rival Saudi Arabia. Despite being an oil-rich and wealthy nation, Saudi Arabia is handily outclassed militarily by Iran, as it has relied on the United States to keep Iran in check for decades. No other power is likely to prevent Iranian aggression in the Middle East, nor do they have the capability to do so. All European powers, save for France, simply no longer have the expeditionary capabilities to respond to military conflicts around the world without U.S. support. And France lacks the assets needed to significantly counter Iranian aggression so far from its own shores.